Your grandparents saved money. They kept it in a bank, watched it grow slowly, bought a house at 30, retired at 65, called it a plan. Your parents saved money. They watched the interest rate drop from 8% to 4% to 2%, still bought the house a little later, a little smaller, called it fine. You are saving money right now. The interest rate on your savings account is somewhere between 0.4 and 4% depending on where you park it. Inflation over the last 4 years has quietly eaten 25 to 30 cents of every dollar you saved since 2020. The average house in a major American city is now $7, $8, $900,000. And your savings account, the responsible one you're proud of, is losing ground every single month you keep money sitting in it. So here is the question I want to sit with today. What if saving money, the one thing every parent, every financial advisor, every elementary school booklet ever told you to do, is actually the worst financial decision Gen Z can make in 2026? Not the worst decision emotionally, not the worst decision symbolically, the worst decision mathematically, structurally, and mechanically. What if the thing that was correct for 40 years has quietly stopped working, and almost no one is willing to say it out loud? That's what we're going to dig into right now. No warm-up. We're going to explain how the savings system works, why it made sense for decades, and why the underlying mechanics have shifted in a way that punishes people who follow the old rules. Not because they're stupid, because the game changed and nobody updated the manual. Now let me introduce the central image I'm going to use throughout this entire video, because once you see it, it reframes everything. Think about an escalator going down. You step on it and you start walking upward. Your legs are moving, you're putting in real effort. From your own perspective, from where you're standing on the steps, you feel like you're making progress. You can see where you started. You're higher up than that. Technically, relative to your starting point on the escalator, you are moving upward, but the escalator itself is descending faster than you're climbing. So from outside the escalator, from anyone standing on solid ground watching you, you are slowly going down. You just cannot feel it because your legs are moving and that movement feels like progress. That's a savings account in 2026. Every deposit you make is a step upward. But the escalator, which is inflation, rising asset prices, and the compounding opportunity cost of not owning productive assets, is moving downward faster than your steps can compensate. You feel responsible, you feel disciplined, you are, in real terms, losing ground. And I'm going to come back to this escalator throughout the video, not just for savings, for wages, for time, for the entire structural logic of how wealth moves between people in the modern economy. Because the same image applies everywhere once you understand what the escalator actually is and who built it. Let's start at the surface and work our way down. Because most people only see the surface, and the surface alone is already troubling. Right now, in early 2026, a high-yield savings account is paying between 4 and 4.5% in the United States. And honestly, that's not nothing. For the decade between 2010 and 2020, we were under 1% for most of it. Under 0.5 for a lot of it. So 4% feels like a return of sanity. People on finance forums are genuinely celebrating 4% savings rates. Finally, it makes sense to save again, they say. Here's the problem, and it's not subtle. Consumer inflation from 2020 through 2024 ran at cumulative rates that most people haven't fully absorbed. You had north of 8% in 2022, 4 to 5% in 2023, 3 to 4% in 2024 and into 25. If you had $50,000 saved in January of 2020, that $50,000 in terms of what it can actually buy today is worth somewhere between $35,000 and $38,000. You lost $12,000 to $15,000 of purchasing power, not through a crash, not through bad investments, not through any mistake. You lost it by doing exactly what you were told. By being responsible, by keeping it safe. The erosion was invisible because it was slow. It happened in increments, a grocery bill a little higher, gas a little more expensive, rent up again, you felt it, but you didn't see it as a deduction from your savings account, so psychologically it didn't register as a loss. But the math doesn't care about your psychology. The math just runs, and that's before we even touch the real inflation story, which is not groceries. The real inflation story is asset prices. The median home in the United States in 2012 was approximately $150,000. By 2016, it was around 220,000. By 2019, 240,000. By 2024, $400,000. In markets like Denver, Austin, Nashville, Phoenix, Raleigh, and most coastal cities, you're talking 500 to 700,000 for a median home. Some of those markets doubled in less than 5 years. Let me make this concrete with a scenario. You're 22 years old in 2016. You've got a real job making $48,000 a year. You are genuinely disciplined. You track your expenses. You spend less than you earn. You save $8,000 a year every year for 8 consecutive years. Not theoretical, not aspirational. You actually do it. You end up in 2024 with $64,000. In 2016, the house you had your eye on was $250,000. A 20% down payment was $50,000. You needed 6 years to get there. Realistic. Linear, the old math worked, but you waited. Maybe you weren't in the right city yet. Maybe the timing wasn't right. Whatever the reason, in 2024, that same house is $480,000. The 20% down payment is now $96,000. You have $64,000. You are $32,000 further away from ownership than when you started 8 years ago, despite 8 years of perfect financial discipline. The escalator went down faster than you walked up. Now, I want to be careful here because some people hear this and think the argument is that home prices will always go up, or that owning a home is always the right move, or that I'm just doing doom posting about housing. I'm not making any of those claims. The housing example is illustrative of a broader mechanism. The mechanism is asset prices are growing faster than wages and faster than what any standard savings vehicle returns. That gap between what cash can accumulate and what assets cost is the structural problem. Housing is just the most visceral version of it because everyone needs somewhere to live. The same dynamic plays out with equities, with small business valuations, with commercial real estate, with essentially anything that produces cash flow or appreciates in value. The things worth owning are getting more expensive faster than cash-based savings can keep up with. And that gap is the escalator. Now let's go one layer deeper, because the pure inflation math is actually the shallow version of the argument. The more important thing to understand is why the system is built this way, because it didn't happen by accident. When interest rates are low, borrowing money is cheap. When borrowing money is cheap, people and institutions with access to capital borrow heavily and buy assets. More money chasing the same supply of assets means asset prices go up. The people who already own assets get richer as the prices of their holdings increase. The people who are saving cash get relatively poorer because each year their cash buys fewer assets. They're doing the right thing by their own lights, but the system is rewarding a different behavior entirely. When interest rates are high, borrowing is expensive. Asset prices cool, cash becomes comparatively more valuable. Savers get a brief window of advantage. This is the current moment in 2026. Rates are elevated, cash yields are decent, savers feel temporarily vindicated. But here's the structural catch. High interest rates slow the economy. Companies borrow less. Hiring slows. Wage growth stagnates, and the political and institutional pressure to bring rates back down accumulates within 2 to 4 years every time. Central banks in every developed economy face the same incentive. Governments carry enormous debt burdens, and that debt becomes much more expensive to service when rates are high. The pressure to cut rates is essentially baked in. It always returns. The default state of the modern economy is low rate, asset inflating, cash eroding. High rates are the exception. Every saver celebrating 4% right now should understand they are in the exception, not the rule, and the exception has an expiration date. But there's actually a third layer that makes this almost architecturally strange when you see it clearly. The tax code. In the United States and in most developed economies, the tax system actively rewards borrowing to buy assets and penalizes holding cash. Mortgage interest on primary and investment properties is often deductible. Business loan interest is deductible. Depreciation on investment real estate lets you reduce taxable income even while the property's market value increases. Capital gains on assets held long-term are taxed at preferential rates compared to ordinary income. If you take out a loan to buy a piece of equipment that generates revenue, the interest is an expense that reduces your tax burden. Meanwhile, if you save money in a standard savings account and earn interest on it, that interest is taxable as ordinary income. You pay your full marginal rate on the gain. So that 4% savings rate after taxes in a middle income bracket becomes roughly 2.8 to 3% net. Against 3 to 4% consumer inflation, you are losing purchasing power in real terms while simultaneously paying taxes on your nominal gain. The number goes up, the value goes down, and you write a check to the government for the privilege of watching the number go up. The system was not accidentally built to incentivize debt-funded asset accumulation over cash savings. It was deliberately structured that way over decades by people who owned assets and understood the mechanics. The people who follow the old advice, work hard, spend less, save more, be patient, are following a script written for a system that no longer exists in the same form. They are using a map for a city that has been partially demolished and rebuilt around different roads. If you're finding this useful, subscribing actually makes a difference for this channel. I put out content like this on a consistent schedule, and the algorithm treats independent creators about as generously as a savings account treats depositors. Hit subscribe, it helps more than you'd think. Now let me walk you through two people with the same starting position and different instincts because the math makes this concrete in a way that abstract arguments can't. Call them A and B. Both are 24 years old in 2018. Both earn $52,000 a year. Both have exactly $1,000 a month available after all their fixed expenses. Rent, food, utilities, transportation. Same income, same city, same month. Person A follows the conventional playbook. He saves aggressively, he keeps money liquid. He doesn't invest because the market feels risky, especially after the 2020 COVID crash scared him off. He puts $900 a month into a high-yield savings account. Over the 6-year window from 2018 to 2024, his average savings rate is around 1.8% given how rates move during that period. He puts $100 a month into a basic index fund, but inconsistently. He skips months. He pulls some out during the 2020 crash. His index position is a mess. After 6 years, person A has approximately $68,000 in savings. His index fund, badly managed and partially liquidated, holds maybe $7,000 to $8,000. Total, roughly $76,000. He is proud of this, and he should be to some extent. That took real consistency. Person B reads differently. He keeps $300 a month in savings for his emergency fund, builds it up to about $12,000 in the first year, and then keeps topping it up modestly as a buffer. The remaining $700 every single month goes into a broad market index fund, not a stock pick, not a theme, total market. He sets it up as an automatic transfer on payday. He treats it like rent. He does not look at the balance during the 2020 crash. He does not pull it, he does not pause, he just lets it run. By 2024, person B has $22,000 in cash savings, which is actually a healthy emergency fund. His index fund with $700 a month compounding at historical average returns through a period that included a crash and a strong recovery is worth approximately $82,000. Total, $104,000. Person A has $76,000. Person B has $104,000. That's a $28,000 gap generated not from earning more, not from working harder, not from a lucky bet, from pointing the same money at a different machine. But the story continues, and the continuation is actually the more important part. In 2024, both of them want to buy a house. Person A has $68,000 in cash. He can fund a down payment on a decent property. He does it. Person B has $22,000 in cash, which alone isn't enough for a full down payment. He liquidates $45,000 from his index fund, pays some capital gains tax, keeps the rest in the market, and makes his down payment too. Same outcome on the surface. Both bought houses, both became homeowners. But person B still has roughly $40,000 in the market. Continuing to compound, person A's investable assets are essentially zero. His net worth is almost entirely locked in illiquid real estate. Person B owns real estate and a still growing investment account. Fast forward 5 years, a job loss, an opportunity. A market dip that's actually a buying moment. A business idea that needs seed capital. Who is more positioned to act? Person A, who optimized for safety and ended up with one large illiquid asset and no flexibility. Or person B, who made a decision in 2018 to point money at a machine and let it run. The discipline was the same. The strategy wasn't. And the strategy is what mattered. The escalator didn't pause for person A's patience. It just kept going. Now, let me introduce a concept that almost all personal finance content skips because it requires people to think about money differently than they were taught, and that's uncomfortable. There's a difference between the velocity of money and the storage of money. When most people hear saving money, they're thinking about storage, parking it, keeping it somewhere safe, liquid, accessible, which is not irrational. Liquidity has real value, but the problem is that storage and wealth building are not the same activity, and treating them as interchangeable is where the compounding error begins. Wealth doesn't work like a parking lot where you store value and retrieve it later. It works more like a factory where inputs go in, machines run, and outputs come out greater than the inputs. The money either flows through a machine that produces more money, or it sits on the down escalator. There's no neutral. There's no stable ground. Cash in a savings account below the inflation rate is not sitting still. It is actively being extracted. The extraction is just slow enough to feel like stillness. The wealthy don't have more discipline around savings in the traditional sense. What they have is more machines. A rental property is a machine. Someone else pays you monthly to use your asset. A business is a machine. It converts labor and capital into revenue, and if it's run well, the revenue exceeds the inputs. A diversified equity index is a machine. It owns small pieces of thousands of businesses generating profit, and the profits compound. Even a carefully structured low-interest loan used to purchase an appreciating asset is a machine. Someone else's money is making you money. Cash in a savings account below inflation is not a machine. It is a container with a slow leak. So here is the mental framework I find most useful for thinking about where people actually are in their financial life. 3 levels. Not 3 income levels, 3 structural levels. Level 1 is the survival loop. This is where the majority of people operate for their entire working lives without realizing the loop is a loop. You earn income through labor. The income covers expenses. There's a surplus, the surplus goes into storage. The storage leaks slowly to inflation. Next year, the same cycle begins again. You feel stable because you are not losing money visibly. You feel responsible because you are spending less than you earn, but you are not compounding. You are cycling. The amount in storage might grow nominally year after year. In real terms, adjusted for what it can actually buy, the progress is minimal. You are walking up the down escalator. Your legs are tired. You are not rising. Level 2 is the machine building loop. This is where the direction of surplus money changes. Instead of being stored, it is deployed into something that produces a return above inflation. An index fund, a piece of rental property, a small ownership stake in a business, even a high-quality bond in the right environment. The amount of money required to enter level 2 is not large. This is the key misunderstanding that keeps people in level 1. They believe level 2 is for wealthy people with large sums. It is not. It is a directional shift, not an amount shift. The $700 a month that person B redirected into an index fund was level 2 thinking applied to a level 1 income. Same money, different direction. Completely different outcome. Level 3 is leverage. This is where you use borrowed capital structured intelligently to acquire machines faster than your own income can fund. The mortgage on a house, the loan for a rental property, the business line of credit that funds equipment generating revenue above the interest cost. Leverage is the reason some people build several $100,000 in net worth in their 20s and 30s without having extraordinarily high incomes. They controlled more assets relative to their equity than their savings alone would have allowed. Used correctly, leverage multiplies everything. Used without understanding the mechanics, without a margin of safety, without a clear picture of what the cash flows look like under stress, leverage destroys people quickly and completely. I've watched it happen. The error is almost always the same. Someone sees a level 3 tool, skips level 2 entirely, and overloads on debt to acquire assets they don't understand how to manage. The point is that most financial advice lives entirely at level 1. Cut your expenses, save more. Be patient. These are level 1 tools. They are necessary but not sufficient. They create the surplus that feeds the machine. But if you never build the machine, you just have a larger leak in the container. And this is where the generational argument becomes genuinely sharp, not just stylistically provocative. My uncle once told me the key to financial security was a savings account and not being wasteful. He said this while paying $140 a month for cable he watches maybe 3 hours a week. He has $42,000 in a savings account earning 1.1%. He is deeply proud of this. He considers himself a financially responsible person, and in 1985 he would have been exactly right. In 2026, he is donating purchasing power to the banking system every quarter and thanking them for the receipt. That's not a character flaw. It's a mismatch between the system he learned in and the system he's currently operating in. The escalator looked different in 1985. It was slower. The savings rate cleared inflation for long stretches. Wages grew fast enough relative to asset prices that the cash-to-ownership pipeline actually functioned. The plan worked, so the plan became wisdom. And wisdom, once established, is extraordinarily resistant to updating. Now, here's the piece that I think is genuinely uncomfortable and almost never discussed directly. The people most likely to follow the old savings advice are the people with the most financial anxiety. The people who grew up without much money, who are scared of losing what they've built, who associate risk with catastrophe because they watched financial instability up close growing up. The savings account feels emotionally safe because it doesn't fluctuate. The number goes up slowly, steadily. It never surprises you on a bad day. But the safety is an illusion. The account is not fluctuating because it's stable. It's not fluctuating because the extraction is too slow to register as movement. Meanwhile, the asset prices the account was supposed to eventually fund are fluctuating upward in ways that compound the gap. The system does not penalize scared cash holders out of malice. It penalizes them structurally. The mechanism is neutral. Inflation doesn't care about your childhood. Asset prices don't adjust for your anxiety. The escalator goes down at its own speed regardless of how much you need it to slow down. And there is a perverse circularity to this. The more a person needs financial safety, the more likely they are to choose cash storage. The more they choose cash storage, the slower their real wealth grows. The slower their real wealth grows, the more financially anxious they remain, which makes them more likely to choose cash storage next year. Meanwhile, the people who already own assets, who are insulated from the fear of losing their savings account because their savings aren't stored in savings accounts, benefit from the same inflation and asset appreciation that harms the cash holders. They own the escalator. The cash holders are riding it. This is not a rich people bad argument. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm describing a mechanical reality. The system rewards asset ownership and punishes cash storage. Full stop. You can feel however you want about that. The feeling doesn't change the output. Someone on a personal finance forum once wrote, and I want to be careful here because the sincerity was genuinely affecting. They wrote something along the lines of, I finally hit my goal of $100,000 in savings. Time to let it sit and grow. The account was earning 2.1%. The person was 31 years old. 47 people replied with congratulations. Nobody mentioned the escalator. I thought about that thread for a long time. Let me bring this back to where we started, because the point of this video was never to make anyone feel bad. The point is to make the mechanics visible so you can make deliberate decisions instead of inherited ones. The reason saving money worked for your grandparents and partially worked for your parents was not discipline. It was not virtue. It was structural compatibility. The savings rate often cleared or matched inflation. Wages grew fast enough relative to asset prices that the conversion from cash to ownership happened within a reasonable timeline. The alternative, investing in markets, was genuinely inaccessible to ordinary people without significant capital and a broker. The constraint shaped the behavior became virtue, the virtue became cultural norm. And now the constraint is gone, the behavior is no longer optimal, but the cultural norm remains intact and is still being transmitted to the next generation as wisdom. I want to be completely precise about what I'm arguing because it's easy to misread this. I am not saying you should have no cash savings. An emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of essential expenses in an accessible liquid account is basic risk management. Without that buffer, a single car repair or medical bill or job gap destroys your ability to think about anything else. That floor exists and it matters. The escalator analogy has a ground level. You do not want to fall off the bottom. What I am saying is that saving money as a wealth-building strategy, treating cash accumulation as the primary mechanism for financial progress, is a category error in the current system. It is using a tool for a job it can no longer do. The savings account was designed for a different economic environment, and the environment has changed in ways that are structural, not cyclical. So here are 3 actual adjustments, not a lifestyle revolution, not a manifesto. 3 directional shifts that change the output of the machine without requiring you to become a different person. The first is changing the target. Stop treating cash accumulation as the goal and start treating asset accumulation as the goal. Cash is a transition state. It is the material that goes into the machine, not the output that comes out. Your emergency fund is the only cash that has a justified reason to exist as cash indefinitely. Every dollar above that buffer should have a direction. An index fund, a down payment account that will actually convert to property within a defined timeline, a business reinvestment, some form of productive asset. If the dollar doesn't have a direction, it is sitting on the escalator. This doesn't require extraordinary income. It requires extraordinary clarity about what you're actually doing with your surplus. A broad market index fund through a simple brokerage account requires no minimum investment in 2026. You can automate it, you can ignore it, you just need to start it and leave it alone. The second is understanding leverage before dismissing it. Not credit card debt, not a loan for a depreciating consumer purchase. I mean the mortgage that lets you control a $400,000 asset on $80,000. The business credit line that funds a machine generating more revenue than it costs. The investment property loan where the tenant services the debt. These instruments are not debt in the same category as buying a television on a payment plan. They are mechanisms for controlling more productive assets than your savings alone would allow. The reason some people go from essentially zero to several $100,000 in net worth in their late 20s and 30s without extraordinary income is almost always that they understood and applied leverage correctly. Used without understanding, it collapses everything. Used with a clear picture of cash flows, margin of safety, and stress scenarios, it is the single most powerful accelerant available to someone without inherited wealth. The third is respecting time as the non-renewable input. This is the one people understand abstractly and ignore practically. Every month you spend storing cash instead of deploying it is a month of compounding you cannot recover. At 25 or 26, you have the one asset that wealthier people with larger portfolios cannot buy back. Time. A 25-year-old who deploys $30,000 into a diversified market fund and never adds another dollar will, at historical average returns of approximately 9% annually, have somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000 by age 65. The same $30,000 deployed at 45 produces roughly $120,000 by the same age. Identical capital, identical instrument, 30 fewer years of compounding. That $280,000 difference came entirely from time. Not talent, not strategy, not income. Time. When you think about keeping $50,000 in a savings account at 3% instead of deploying it into something returning 8 or 9, you need to multiply that return gap by the number of years you are delaying. Over 10 years, the difference on $50,000 between 3% and 9% is approximately $70,000 to $80,000. Over 20 years, it is closer to $200,000. Not from working more, not from taking dangerous risks, just from not standing on the escalator for an extra decade. The escalator goes down whether you are looking at it or not. The only move is to stop walking up it and build something that actually rises. That's the video. If you want to understand more about how financial systems actually work, how incentives are structured, and what the mechanics of wealth building look like at each level, subscribe. I put this out consistently. No motivation, no flexing, just the systems broken down until they make sense.